When I was a 22-year-old seminary student, one day I was praying in the chapel, and there was a distinct moment when I felt like God was calling me to write. Now here's the catch. About the same time, I took a graduate assessment that revealed a low aptitude for writing. In other words, whatever you do, don't write a book. What I'm saying is this: writing for me is not a natural gifting, it's a divine calling. Well, the good news is that God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. But I knew that if I was going to write, I would need to read. And that's what I did. I read 3,000 books before I wrote one. Well, 13 years later, I still had nothing to show for the dream that God had given me. My birthday became an annual reminder of another year gone by without fulfilling that calling. That's when I made a defining decision that I wasn't going to turn 35 without a book to show for it. I decided that I would do a 40-day personal prayer challenge. In the opening session, I challenged you to find a place. Well, my place for those 40 days was the Senate fountain between Union Station and the Capitol. It became a burning bush to me. I would pace and pray for an hour every day, and then I'd go back to my office and write. Well, the net result was a self-published book you probably never heard of called ID the True You, but then the next year I wrote my first published book, In a Pit with a Lion on a Snowy Day, and 10 years later I've written 15 books, but it started with a 40-day prayer circle. If you want a breakthrough, sometimes you have to pray through. In the last session, we talked about dreaming big. If your dream doesn't scare you, it's too small. But you can't just dream big, you also have to pray hard. You know, in my experience, a dream without a deadline is dead. And so that's what I did. I gave myself a deadline, not about putting a timeline on God. It was about putting a timeline on me. Praying hard includes taking that first step of faith, and that's what this session is all about. In 1940, Dr. J. Edwin Orr took a group of Wheaton College students to study abroad in England. One of their stops included the Epworth Rectory. The rectory now serves as a Methodist museum, but it was the childhood home of John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement. In one of the bedrooms, there are two impressions where it's believed that John Wesley regularly knelt in prayer. As the students were getting back on the bus, Dr. Orr noticed that one student was missing. He went back upstairs, and Dr. Orr found a young Billy Graham kneeling in those knee holes and praying, "Oh Lord, do it again." I live by a simple maxim. If we do what they did in the Bible, God will do what He did. He still speaks. He still heals, He still delivers, He still answers prayer. And there's nothing God wants to do more than to do it again and again and again and again. Of course, we have to posture ourselves the way John Wesley did, the way Billy Graham did. Here's the good news. We're only 2 feet from revival. That's the distance between your knees and the floor. In this session, we'll talk about praying hard. And by definition, praying hard is hard. In God's kingdom, prayer is the heavy lift. It's the hard work. But prayer is the difference between good ideas and God ideas. Prayer is the difference between closed doors and open doors. Prayer is the difference between impossible. But here's the key. You can't just pray like it depends on God. You also have to work like it depends on you. And what I mean by that is this: you can't just talk the talk, you have to walk the walk. In Joshua 3, the Israelites are on the banks of the Jordan River. They're a stone's throw away from the promised land. This is the moment they've been praying for and believing for. But I think this is where many of us get stuck spiritually. We can see the promised land from where we stand, but here's what happens. We're waiting for God to part the waters, and God is waiting for us to step into the river. Let me give you a definition of faith. Faith is taking the first step before God reveals the second step. You have to pray like it depends on God, no doubt, but at some point, you've got to step out in faith. And I'll double back to that idea in a minute, but let me set the table. Joshua 3:5 says, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you." I think we get this backwards. We want to do amazing things for God, but that isn't our job. That's God's job. God is the one who does amazing things for us. So what's our job? Well, our job is to consecrate ourselves to God. And if we do our job, God is going to do his job. More than 100 years ago, a British revivalist was preaching a tent meeting, and he issued a holy dare that would change a life, a city, and a generation. He said, "The world has yet to see what God will do with and for and through and in and by the man who is fully and wholly consecrated to him." In the audience that day was a young Dwight L. Moody. Moody's influence is tough to measure, but very few people had more impact on 19th century America. And he's still influencing millions of people through the church, the school, and the publishing house that bear his name. But I think his influence traces back to this moment. He took that challenge personally. It was a defining moment in his life, and his life really came to define consecration. The word consecrate means to set yourself apart. By definition, consecration demands full devotion. It's dethroning yourself and enthroning Jesus Christ. It's the complete divestiture of all self-interest. It's giving God veto power. It's surrendering all of you to all of him. It's a simple recognition that every second of time, every ounce of energy, and every penny of money is a gift from God and for God. Consecration is going all in and all out for God. That's really what this study is about. It's not just about circling things in prayer. It's about consecrating ourselves to God. Again, it's not about outlining our agenda to God. It's about getting into God's word in God's presence and discerning his agenda for us. And when we do, we've got to take a step of faith. Let me put it this way. You can't just draw a circle in the sand and pray. You have to draw a line in the sand and take a step of faith. And that brings us to a curious command in Joshua 3:8. It says, "When you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river." This is where we get stuck spiritually. We want God to go first. We want God to part the waters. Why? Because then it doesn't require any faith. We want God to do it for us, but God is waiting for us to take a step of faith and get our feet wet. I'm not sure what you're circling during this study, but you can't just sit back and wait for the waters to part. Look for opportunities to take a step of faith. It might be sharing your faith with someone you're circling in prayer. It might be filling out an application or making a phone call or buying a ticket. Let me give you a fun example. I've shared a little bit about our coffee house on Capitol Hill, and it's an absolute miracle. But I believe it started with an $85 step of faith. I was at a school auction of all places when I spotted the least likely item to be bid on. It was a book on zoning rules and regulations for Capitol Hill. We still hadn't purchased the property at 201 F Street, and I knew it would take a miracle, but I knew that if we did, we'd have to get that property rezoned. Well, the opening bid was $85, so I took an $85 step of faith, knowing that if we didn't get a contract, that money was down the drain. But it was my way of stepping into the river. It was my way of getting my feet wet. The last two words of Mark's gospel are signs following. Honestly, we wish it said signs preceding, because we love it when God goes first. But that isn't the way it works. Faith is taking the first step before God reveals the second step. You need to pray about it. Then you need to act on it. You need to step into the river, and the signs will follow that step of faith. After writing The Circle Maker, I heard a story that's become one of my favorites. It's a story about a drought that hit the state of Mississippi about 50 years ago. When that drought threatened to destroy a season of crops, a rural church called for an emergency prayer meeting. Well, dozens of farmers showed up to pray. Most of them wore their traditional overalls, but one of them wore waders. He got a few funny looks, probably like Noah did when he was building the ark, but that's faith at its finest. If we genuinely believe that God is going to answer our prayer for rain, isn't that exactly what we would wear? Why not dress for the miracle? I love the childlike faith of that old farmer. When he was asked why he was wearing waders, he simply said, "I don't want to walk home wet." And he didn't, but everybody else did. I can't help but wonder if that act of faith is what sealed the miracle. I don't know for sure, but I do know this. God is honored when we act as if He's going to answer our prayers. And acting as if means acting on our prayers. After hitting our knees, we need to get back up and take a step of faith. And those small steps of faith often turn into giant leaps. Like Noah, who kept building an ark day after day, we need to keep hammering away at the dream God has given us. Like the Israelites who kept circling Jericho for 7 days, we need to keep circling the promises of God. And like Elijah, who kept sending his servant back to look for a rain cloud, we need to actively and expectantly wait for God's answer. During this study, I'm challenging you to pray like it depends on God, and that's hard. But you also have to work like it depends on you. At some point, you need to quit praying about it and do something about it. Inaction is inaction. Indecision is a decision. One of the defining moments in my prayer life happened more than a decade ago. I was in a small group with a friend who worked for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship at Georgetown University. Jeremy was working on a shoestring budget, and their campus ministry needed a computer. He shared the request at the end of our meeting, and I agreed to pray for it. But when I started praying for it, I felt like the Lord told me to quit praying. It was like the Holy Spirit said, "Why are you asking me? You're the one with an extra computer." So I quit praying mid-sentence. I didn't need to pray about it. I needed to do something about it. Remember when Jesus said in Matthew 5, if you're at the altar offering a gift and you suddenly realize that someone has something against you, leave your gift there at the altar, get up, and go find that person and make it right. It's a different context, but the same principle. Do something about it. There comes a moment when praying becomes a form of spiritual procrastination. Listen, delayed obedience is disobedience. It's time to stop praying and start acting. Quit praying about the program and fill out the application. Quit praying for the friends you hurt and make it right with a phone call. Don't just complain to God about your coworker. Circle them in prayer, and don't just pray for missionaries. Write a check. One of my heroes is Peter Marshall, the former chaplain of the United States Senate. His prayers at the opening of Senate sessions are timeless. But Peter Marshall also believed in an action-oriented approach to Scripture. He said, I wonder what would happen if we all agreed to read one of the Gospels until we came to a place that told us to do something, then went out to do it, and only after we had done it, began reading again. Marshall said, our problem is not so much that we don't know what we should do. We know perfectly well, but we don't want to do it. Please don't misinterpret what I'm about to say. Pray about everything, then pray some more. But prayer that doesn't lead to action isn't true prayer. It's self-talk. One of the great mistakes we make is asking God to do for us what God wants us to do for Him. We confuse our roles. I sometimes wonder how many of our prayer requests are within our power to answer. We ask God to do what we can do ourselves, and then we wonder why God doesn't respond. Maybe it's because God won't do for us what we can do for ourselves, so we don't do our job, and then we try to do God's job for Him. Listen, our job is to consecrate ourselves. That means praying like it depends on God and working like it depends on us. And if we do our job, God is going to do His job. He's going to do amazing things in us and for us and through us. So at the end of this session, what step of faith is God calling you to take? What river do you need to step into? Where do you need to get your feet wet? Dream big, pray hard, think long.